Dear colleagues, dear students, it's a wonderful event that today our professors will present their achievement of a book on the Russia-Ukrainian war and its implications on Central Asia. And I'm really, really happy that the Department of Political Science and International Relations is very active in writing the book and publishing the book, as well as our colleagues from the law school, including Aizada from HBU and many others who were there. This is an enormous and great achievement. So I would suggest to applaud them for this success. And this is an initiative that CSS starts with the presentation of this book. So any publications worth reaching wider audience will be presented as long as the authors are fine with that. Professor Xiaotong is here. He also has a book which will be probably presented if he agrees. Sorry, Mariam, on March 4th. And one, Ronara Dedebayeva, she also has a book which we plan to present. So this is a very, it's very important for CSS to have such presentation of these achievements. Thank you very much, and good luck with the presentations.
So, dear all, thank you very much for coming to our book launch. So we have wrote in a collective way an edited book on the Russia-Ukraine war and the implications on Central Asia, resilience, connectivity, and decolonization. So, and it was published in 2024, October, by the Roman and the Litchfield Publishing House in the USA. And I'm the editor. I and my colleague, Assylzat Karabayeva from KIMEP University from Astana. So we two of us edited a book, and we have 11 contributing authors. And here today we're going to have 5 contributing authors, and we are pleased to share with the main idea of the book, our findings, key findings, and also the brilliant contribution and the works of our the authors. So if I start just with the brief background about the book. So the idea actually happened or came during the conference in 2023, the International Conference on Law and Social Science, which was held at the SDU University. And by the way, in this year, there is also another conference. This conference also happening in April, so those who also want to join. So the proposals are still open for the exception. So again, in 2023, we had this conference, and we had the brilliant authors from the different parts of the Central Asia, including Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, and many of them from the Kazakhstan. And after the conference, we decided to collaboratively write a book, and I and my colleague, Assylzat, we decided to be the editors of the book. So again, the focus was the war in Ukraine and the implications on Central Asia, and especially when I started. So during that time, actually, I was the research fellow at the Washington University. When I started reading the literature, so reviewing the scholarly works, so I had kind of confusion because, again, there was some contradictions, controversials, even in the findings of the scholarly works. Some of them citing and saying that the implications for the Central Asian countries to be expected as catastrophic, very much tragic, even kind of going to the so-called Thucydides trap, or even having the long-lasting Cold War, and like very much kind of conflictual kind of results. At the same time, we also had some other scholarly works where mostly cited and gave some positive kind of implications in terms of region building or bringing the agency activeness of the Central Asian countries and enhancing this decolonization kind of process happening in Central Asia. So again, we have left with this kind of nuanced kind of the feelings during that time, and there was the idea: what if, as scholars from Central Asian countries, not necessarily relying on the data or the information coming from outside, but instead looking from inside, like considering the research coming from the local Central Asian scholars and how we see the implications of the war for the Central Asian countries. So this is not working. Can I switch to the next one? Yes, now it's okay, right? So again, the research question was what are the implications of the war on Central Asia? And next one. Yeah, the next one. Next page. And especially while we were kind of doing the research, we came into kind of the account that new terms actually started being implemented in the context of Central Asian studies. So one is resilience. So whether it's economic resilience, whether it's like as a decolonization process, mostly resilience coming from the society and the state, from the both state and the society members. And another one, regional connectivity, especially in terms of trade and infrastructure. And again, decolonization in sense of the actors agency of Central Asian countries, and perhaps some local regional framework or regional order emerging in Central Asia. So again, mostly we also asked our contributors to focus more on these three concepts: resilience, regional connectivity, and decolonization. Please, next slide. Okay, so again, the approach, research approach was multidisciplinary, so not necessarily kind of, again, trying to see not only from one perspective, but we have included different perspectives, and I'll in detail talk about a few seconds later. And another theoretical approach here, we used the Akhmetov so-called global IR theory. So global IR theory being more pluralist, not necessarily kind of dividing in terms of theory, mainstream theories and the critical theory, so mostly focusing the pluralist approach, as well as in order also to listen the local voices, Central Asian voices. So we kind of found that this is the most appropriate kind of theory to be able to apply in our book. Next page, please. So, yeah, we can also go to the next one. So the book actually has three sections, the three parts, and the first part, it mostly focused on the nation building process and also how the war in Ukraine actually had implications on nation building processes in the case of Central Asian countries, and the state and society relationship, and also for the media implications. So again, we had the Bakhchan Kumanov, who talked about the nation building process, especially in the case of the Kazakhstan, and how war in Ukraine actually impacted also for the nation building process in Kazakhstan. Then we had Nygmet Ibadildin, our colleague from this university, right? And he also focused on how the war in Ukraine actually kind of applied towards the state and society kind of interactions, links, and how they were kind of responding to this occasion. And then we have the Bauzhan Akhmetov, and he considered how media was responding to the war, especially considering the independent medias and the government medias, and in what sense their narratives were different, and how they were actually delivering or framing the war in Ukraine and the implications for Central Asian countries. Next page. In the second part of the book, we had the war and its implication on the trade and domestic and the foreign policies. We have Aizada Nuriddenova. She's joining nowadays today with us. She's here, and she also focused on the foreign policy making, how the war and the impact for the foreign policy making of the Central Asian countries, particularly on the from the Kazakhstan's perspective. Then we have Bakhtiar Ibadildin and Julduz Tigsbekova. They are our colleagues from Kyrgyzstan, University, and they mostly focused on how the war in Ukraine implied or impacted for the domestic and foreign economic policies of Kyrgyzstan. Then Almaz Akhmetov, and he's from the Tsukuba University. He's joining us online today, and he looked at the implication of the war on the trade side. Trade in Central Asian countries. The next page. In the third part of our book, we looked at more on the legal and the normative perspectives. We have Nicolás Zambrana-Tévar, our professor from law college, law school, and also Rustam Atajan from the law school. And our professors, they looked at how, again, war in Ukraine actually implied for the legal aspects, especially not only looking at how its implication on the states, but also individuals, right, private companies, right, and also how the sanctions and how adhering to the sanction rules or again deviating from it, what kind of implications this also might kind of have on the Central Asian countries. So this kind of issues also discussed in these corresponding chapters. And also we had Halim Yezioglu, and he looked at how the normative aspect, right, the institutions and the international law, and again being consistent with the international law as how it might be very much important for Central Asian countries, also discussed in this chapter. So yeah, next page. So if I jump to the key findings, so because I have the limited time, so we can see the key findings of the book from the two perspectives, okay? The one is how the war in Ukraine actually, what kind of impact had on the resilience and the regional connectivity in Central Asia, and the second one is more about on the how it like impact for the decolonization and emergence of indigenous and regional order in Central Asia. If I go into more detail in these two kind of perspectives. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we look at the implications of the war in Ukraine, okay, on the resilience and the regional connectivity of Central Asian countries, so according to the findings of our contributing chapters, so what we see is that there is a multiplicity or the kind of complex implications of the war. So what we see is that the countries adapting to the economic pressures and also strengthening regional connectivity. So mostly we see the middle corridor, how the countries, they were also kind of diversifying their economic and infrastructural connections with not only relying on the Russia, still the Russia is really important, and we have highlighted still the dependency on the Russia, okay, and being the dependent on the Russia, but also showing and also that our Central Asian countries also diversifying their economic relationships with the other Gulf countries, the Turkey and Caucasian and the China, and India. So we have also seen that kind of diversification. And then promoting the regional cooperation, especially C5+1 project, right, and how Central Asian countries also leading their the local agency in cooperation with the Western countries, with the Gulf countries, with the China, and they're showing that not necessarily including Russia, including with the Russia, also Central Asian countries being as a regional kind of particular framework, right, that could at the same time being able to balance and construct their interactions. So in that sense, we see how the resilience and the connectivity, regional connectivity is happening, and we have particular corresponding the chapters that in detail show that these things are started and happening, although they are not fast and we don't see the immediate kind of results, but again, the change started. Okay, the next please. Regarding to the decolonization and the indigenous regional order, so again, we have a great chapter written by the KIMEP Ibadildin, where he shows how society in Kazakhstan taking pro-Ukraine kind of side, and how they also kind of try to show how society being kind of showing their kind of resistance, let's say, towards the Russian aggression towards Ukraine, and how like society activists being kind of actively involving. So this kind of side also been shown in our chapters. So again, the decolonization is becoming kind of acute kind of topic, and the discourses, again, narratives in this Central Asian context. We also see the weakening position of Russia, especially again, if you consider the particular leaders and their rhetorics and their stances, okay, they're clearly showing that the Central Asian countries taking the neutrality position, right, not taking any sides, and also not recognizing, according to the international law, and not recognizing particular territories like Lugansk and Donetsk, right, that were taken, annexed by Russia. And we also see the indigenous framework of the regionalism in Central Asia. Although it was not as we expected, we still kind of, expected, or while we were writing at least, we were thinking and expecting that it's perhaps weak kind of most close engagement of the Central Asian countries. Although we have C5+1, we still, as a C5+1, they are working as a kind of working regional kind of order, a particular regional framework for the cooperation, but still we are lacking to see C5+, their own particular framework, so how they, C5 actually kind of not brought their own formula or act. Okay, so they are good in C5+1 kind of framework, and they are articulating particular or good kind of relationship, but we are failing, or we are more kind of slow, okay, in constructing C5's framework or formula. Okay, how we ourselves need to kind of interact and put particular agenda by ourselves. So in that sense, we are still being the slow. Perhaps the interesting sense that there might also be clue, okay, the reason why C5 itself being, the slow in bringing their own agenda. So especially nowadays after the Trump came the power and how current situations are changing, perhaps that's also maybe a good reason for the Central Asian countries even having this kind of loose framework of C5 itself. Right. So again, this also kind of he even in the book, and now particularly now because still only 3 years passed, right, and it's really hard to come to particular conclusion, okay, and say the kind of the right kind of answer. But still, as a discussion, there are a lot of questions and the clarifications need to be kind of answered and be put. And again, in this book presentation, so that's our aim, okay, just to bring this kind of discourses and what is happening and where we're heading to, just to show particular perspectives. So I think I have overused my time, so let me stop here and give the floor to our other the corresponding authors, and perhaps during the Q&A session, maybe I will conclude, okay, by kind of the final kind of thoughts. So now let me give the floor to Dr. Nygmet Ibadildin, and if I briefly introduce you, Professor Nygmet. So Dr. Nygmet Ibadildin graduated in 1995 from Kazakhstan University, majoring in philosophy. He earned his Master's of Arts in International Relations from California State University, Fresno, and completed his PhD in 2011 at the University of Tampere School of Management with dissertation of Rule of New and Old Institutional Framework in Combating the Resource Course in Kazakhstan. So Dr. Ibadildin has extensive teaching experience at various institutions in Kazakhstan and abroad. Currently teaches at KIMEP University in Almaty, Kazakhstan. His research interests includes the political economy of natural resources, institutional development, and the post-Soviet institution and discourse analysis, And the Professor Ibadildin's chapter, it is State and Society in Kazakhstan and the War on Ukraine. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope everyone came over here because they are interested in this topic, not because they were kind of asked by their professor, because the topic is very interesting, guys. And KIMEP University reacted to the war in Ukraine almost immediately because the war started in February 24th, 2022, and we have our first roundtable about Ukrainian situation in March 6th of 22nd, excuse me, which is like 10 days after the war started. And I remember we had the series of this war. Dr. Bing supported this type of activities a lot. And we had a lot of different speakers, Ukrainian, Australian, Dutch, Russians as well. And all of them, they demonstrated that the topic is very important. Yes, and finally we published the book with Assylzat as an editor. I congratulate her. I congratulate everyone because Littlefield and Roman is a good publisher. It's second-year publisher, which is really impressive, I would say. It's similar to Palgrave, to Springer, to many university press publishing houses as well. That's why it's very good achievement. Thank you very much, Assylzat, for organizing all of the things. So now about my chapter, and you understand, yes, as soon as war started, if you remember, in Kazakhstan, it was almost immediate reaction by the society, by the state. It was a famous speech by President Tokayev when he said that we will never recognize DNR, LNR, because we respect international law. And my chapter was mainly about state and society. How are they similar and how are they different towards this Ukrainian thing? And interesting enough, despite of all this authoritarian kind of regime in Kazakhstan, with all of this post-Kandahar situation, society over here, in reaction to Ukrainian war, was much more autonomous. State, which was represented mainly by the president, in many occasions was in very balanced way. I mean, the reaction was, and President Tokayev, I think his most radical thing was that speech in front of Putin, in front of, like he said it in Russia actually, that we will not recognize the LNR because of international law. And this theme was repeated constantly: international law, international community, sovereignty of the nations. That this is very, very important, that we cannot make it like well disorder, legal type of aspects, first of all. And in my chapter, I made this so-called critical discourse analysis. I had several, actually I have taken all his interviews and all his tweets about Ukraine. And actually it was mainly three themes over there: international law. Second was this humanitarian support to Ukraine. And actually, I think he had also, I analyzed his conversation with President Zelensky. He had, I think, 3 conversations with him. And tweets by Zelensky and by Tokayev after the conversations, they were different, by the way. And the third topic was also kind of important. It was about trade relationship with Ukraine that we support, that we need some kind of, so trade means peace, actually, yes? So these themes were like international law was the most important part of it, like international law, sovereignty of the nations, UN Charter, all of the things, they were repeated all the time. Yes, second humanitarian, and the third one was the trade relationship with Ukraine. So now about the society relations, or excuse me, society reaction. Society reaction was, it was changing over the years. And by the way, I think our book is really on time because situation in Ukraine is changing. And now I think our book even historical already because situation changed dramatically right now. And in any military cases, there is so-called fog of war. Fog of war, it's like wide metaphor, which is referring that there is certain disinformation, but also it is referring, it's a cloud, it's actually concept that situation is absolutely uncertain and it is changing all the time. Yes, and with Ukraine also, hopefully war will be over. Each war usually ends with a peace. Yes, and in case of society in Kazakhstan for these 3 years, first year, 2022, it was tremendous support to Ukraine, and actually, I think unofficially or in some kind of special way, state supported this reaction because Kazakhstan sent several tons of humanitarian assistance to Ukraine by airplanes. Yes, these airplanes were going on to Poland, from Poland by cars, it was coming to Ukraine. Then this famous, in Russia, or excuse me, in Ukrainian, it will be yurty незалежности, or houses of invincibility. Kazakhstan established them. What does it mean? It means that it was special shelters for people with hot food, with electricity, and with access to internet. And it was traditional Kazakh shelter. Yes, Kazakh house, actually. Yes, Kazakh if we put it like in Kazakh way. Yes, and people were Ukrainian citizens. It was, I think, in Kharkov, in Kiev, in, I'm not sure, I think it was 5 or 6 of them. And Kazakh embassy first they supported it, and then they said that it was done only by Kazakh business. Kazakh business also was sending some, I don't know, 100 generators, or these gasoline generators were sent, some kind of medical stuff, and it was sent by airplane. It means it was tons of the support. Then Ukrainian refugees came over here, not so many, and it was not so kind of publicized, but they came. It was certain collection of the things for them. And KIMEP, for example, also, you know, maybe some of you know Dasha, but there are also other Ukrainian students who came over here because KIMEP provided scholarships for them to come. Yes, it is also all of this humanitarian support, and from humanitarian support, the idea was that we support Ukraine. Yes, but you understand that Kazakhstani society is divided in many lines. It's like inequality, material inequality, political views. Kazakhstan is kind of living society. And we have a lot of, when you say about dependency upon Russia, it's first of all, informational kind of propaganda stuff over there is involved, because a lot of Kazakh citizens, they are in Russian information sphere. They simply watch Russian TV. Yes, and some of them, they against Ukraine. And I remember it was meeting to support Ukraine. Also, now public meetings looks like a rare event, but on the March 7th, right before this feminist march, it was a support of Ukraine special meeting in the Sararka movie theater. And a lot of, actually I met over there a lot of Comedians of those days. Yes, and over there people were supporting Ukraine. It was some Ukrainian people over there singing Ukrainian songs, and some people also, they were against this Ukrainian support as well, and they publicly said it over there. Actually, maybe they were not so loud, but it was definitely there. And you know that people in Kazakhstan, they were donating money to Ukraine, and then other citizens of Kazakhstan, they started to write to KGB that it has to be taken certain action against these people. Still, donation in Kazakhstan to Ukraine, they are open, yes, and people donate money, and it is some kind of common, more or less legal practice, I would say. I just want to say that over time in 2023, and especially in 2024, in January, the social support to Ukraine started to subside. This case happened because of many factors. I think, first of all, it was some kind of fatigue from the war, because Ukrainian war became suddenly attrition war. Yes, attrition war when you have to compete with the resources, not with your kind of military only capabilities, yes, but over the mobilization capability, economic capacity, international support, all of the things. Yes, it's a long war. If Ukrainians were able to withstand Russian invasion in 2022, everyone expected that in 2023 it will be a counteroffensive, and it was a lot of optimism about it. And then the chief commander, Zaluzhny, was removed, and other cases started to happen. And Kazakhs really donation, and Ukrainians recognize it as well from their side, that Kazakhs, they donation started to subside substantially in a sense. people started to lose focus. Still, donations are going on, but society in Kazakhstan, certain new agenda appeared. I think when Donald Trump came to power, now everyone is again reinvigorated this interest to Ukraine. But as I said, our book is already historical one because situation changes all the time more and more. And my last kind of take, I have 10 seconds, I guess, that people published article in Post-Soviet Affairs recently, and it's about public opinion of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan towards this war in Ukraine. And Post-Soviet Affairs is really good, actually, outlet. I think Q1 should be. And over there, they made the sociological research, it is survey and so on and so on. And I guess everyone can expect it that Kyrgyzstan was much more pro-Russian than Kazakhstan. Russian-speaking were much more pro-Russian than ethnic-speaking or Kazakh-Kyrgyz-speaking people. And they kind of proved it statistically what is on the surface. In a sense, Kazakhstan, despite of our boundary with Russia, is much more pro-Ukrainian than Kyrgyzstan, for example. We can talk about, again, these remittances over there, about, I don't know, small states, middle state, about, again, this Russian propaganda, but still just as sociological research. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now I want to give the floor to our next speaker, Aizada Nuriddenova, and she's an assistant professor at the Department of Social Science at the University in Kazakhstan. She holds a PhD in international relations, specializing in Chinese foreign policy from Jiren University in China. So during the 2023-2024 academic year, she was a visiting scholar at the Circulating Program at George Washington University. And the Aizada's chapter is called as the Ukraine War, Domestic Stability, and Kazakhstan's Equidistant Diplomacy. The floor is yours, Aizada.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. First and foremost, I would like to thank the College of Social Sciences at KIMEP University for organizing this great event. I think it's a timely event. And secondly, I would like to thank all the contributors for their hard work. And I also would like to thank our two incredible editors who were very patient with us within the
Yes, it is true.
whole process. It was very difficult to manage all the deadlines and 70 chapters. So it was a really hard work coming from editors, the whole proposal and other writing aspects. Thank you, everyone. So first, I would like to focus on how the war influenced Kazakhstan foreign policy, whether strategically or tactically. First, I would like to focus on the arguments that have been made so far. Many scholars started to talk about Kazakhstan's attempts at diminishing Russia's influence and expansion of relations with other powers or regional powers. And some authors argued that Kazakhstan, although from the very beginning, Kazakhstan announced that it was adhering to the policy of multi-vector approach. However, some authors argued that that was not a true multi-vectorism, and after the war in Ukraine, Kazakhstan began to resort to a true or genuine multi-vector foreign policy. Some authors also asserted that Kazakhstan might be just portraying the image of a distant partner of Russia, but in reality, nothing changed. It was an interesting argument. And there were also some observations that Kazakhstan is using double track approach, meaning that Kazakhstan on the surface appeared to show some assertiveness in relation to Russia, but deep down it carefully abstained from any confrontational moves. So it was really interesting to look at these arguments and observations, and in thinking about the chapter contribution, I tried to sort of systematically look at Kazakhstan's foreign policy and certain measures. So the question is, how did the war in Ukraine affect Kazakhstan's foreign policy? And I make this central argument in which I say that Kazakhstan has been conducting an equidistant diplomacy tactically as part of a larger hedging strategy in relation to its foreign partners, mostly in order to avoid risks and maximize benefits under great uncertainties. And Dr. Ibadildin just now has referred to this uncertainty. And in terms of the theoretical framework, I can combine authoritarian audience cost and equidistant diplomacy. So what I found out here that literature on audience cost overwhelmingly focuses on audience cost in democratic countries. However, there are recent observations in which more and more authors and scholars, they began to write about audience cost in authoritarian settings as well. There are great works done by Weeks on the basis of an example of China and other authoritarian countries. So the bottom line here is that public opinion matters in authoritarian countries too, but there is this lack of consensus on certain mechanisms of how public punishes the leaders. Because in democratic countries, usually public punishes the leaders through elections, right? Especially when leaders, they able to deliver on their promises, especially during international conflicts. But it's not clear how public punishes the leaders in authoritarian settings. One way might be through public protests like the Arab Spring or Bloody January in Kazakhstan. So we can assert that authoritarian leaders are very also sensitive and very carefully watch and monitor the public sentiment inside their country. And we can observe that there is a two-level game going on here. It's sort of a two-level game in which authoritarian leaders, especially in small countries, they try to appease the domestic public, and plus they also try not to offend or irritate great powers, and that gives us a hedging strategy on a long-term perspective, and tactically it gives us equidistant diplomacy. Yeah, just a little bit in terms of the definitions. So in the literature, equidistant diplomacy is defined as a diplomatic tactic aimed at signaling a neutral image. So in order to signal a neutral image, countries usually use these three tools, such as paralleling, downplaying, and broadcasting. Paralleling involves simultaneous moves towards major partners, showing that similar activities are being done in relation to all regional partners. Downplaying refers to diplomatic statements, which try to show that there is no particular tilt towards one particular power, And broadcasting is this explicit expression that shows that the country still has a neutral stance, and it's not really favoring one specific partner. So when it comes to public opinion in Kazakhstan, we can see that it's becoming increasingly important for the leaders, and leaders also try to take into account the public opinion. And in terms of these tools being used, we could see several examples of how Kazakhstan tried to use the tools of paralleling towards Russia and China, European Union, and also some moves regarding downplaying, and also there were certain broadcasting measures as well. I just want to focus on the recent ones. Since the book has published, I can still observe the persistent equidistant diplomacy. For example, in April 2024, Kazakhstan refused to join the BRICS, showing that it prefers the United Nations and again signaling its neutrality. In March 2024, we could see that paralleling tactics were used in the sphere of education and culture. For example, in March 2024, Kazakhstan and China reached an agreement on the opening of the branch of Beijing Language and Culture University in Astana. And in November 2024, there was an announcement on the opening of NDMO branch in Astana and opening of 3 schools with Russian medium of instruction. In terms of infrastructure, we could see some paralleling as well. In November 2024, there was a Sino-Kazakh agreement on building a Kazakh terminal along the Middle Corridor. And we could also see a conclusion of the memorandum on the construction of Ayagos Touching Railway. And very recently, this month actually, we can see another paralleling tactic, which is the announcement on the construction of gas pipeline by Russia in North and Northeast Kazakhstan. So by looking at this, I wanted to show that equidistant diplomacy still continuing. So the conclusion here is that in order to maintain domestic stability, Kazakhstan is resorting to this tactic, and internationally it's trying to curtail the risks and maximize gains under uncertainty. Thank you for your attention.
Now I want to give the floor to Dr. Almaz Akhmetov, who is joining us online today. So Dr. Almaz Akhmetov is a research fellow at the University of Tsukuba in Japan. His research focuses mostly on system analysis for sustainable development. Dr. Akhmetov has vast professional experience in international development in Central Asia with various actors. He holds a PhD degree in engineering from the University of Tsukuba. So welcome, Dr. Almaz. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
The floor is yours, please.
So, okay, let me share my presentation.
You have 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to make it. Thank you very much. In my chapter, I looked at actually trade, how the trade data and how it was changing, and how it was actually evolved during this entire period, and then after the full-scale invasion of Russia, of Ukraine by Russia. So here is the background. So the historically Central Asia was a supply of raw materials to Russian Federation, and then although the role of China has been growing for the last 20 years, the Russia was one of the main trading partner for entire region, and there is a following actually invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2014, imports have been rising, and after initial decline, and then after the second phase of invasion, the republics of the Central Asia were involved in a parallel trade with Russia, and it looks like the exports to the European Union from Central Asia has been hindered by this by the events, and most likely, yeah, it was by those events. Well, I'm not presenting. Yeah? Okay, so okay, probably the first thing to look at would be the transport infrastructure, because Central Asia is a landlocked region, and it depends on the trade. It depends on automobile and railroads, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, most of the international corporations chose Russia for the location of their plants and of their businesses due to this kind of transport Russia-oriented center transport infrastructure, and actually the knowledge of the region was Russia-centered. So this decision actually also contributed to unbalanced trade between Russia and the former Soviet republics, including Central Asia. And despite heavy investments by China into infrastructure, the Russia remains the primary trade direction in terms of infrastructure. Here is the maps of, on the left-hand side, you see automobile roads, and on the right-hand side, you see railways in the region. As you can see, the density of the roads and the direction of the roads from the region actually primarily going to Russia, and the connectivity to Russia is one of the actually the region well connected to Russia than to other neighboring countries. So if you look at the structure of the trade in Central Asia, although the share of Russian exports and imports declined after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it still remains one of the major recently source of imports to the region. So, but simply because the countries of the region are not homogeneous, so there is a need to look into trade profiles on national level. So as you can see here, it's European Union has been also like one more remark. European Union has been one of it was the main export direction of raw materials from the region. So if you look at Kazakhstan, as you can see, the entire period from 2000, Russia was a net importer, was a net exporter, or Kazakhstan was a net importer when it comes to trade with Russia. And although the imports have decreased, of Russian share of imports decreased, but still it remains one of the main, how do you say, source of import for Kazakhstan. Although the exports have slumped after the collapse of Soviet Union, simply because the raw materials, the destination for raw materials were European Union. And as you can also notice that in mid of 2000s, there was a aggressive food security doctrine in Russia, which limited actually export from agricultural products from the region, including from Kazakhstan. So, and another remark, Kazakhstan has to import oil products from Russia due to insufficient capacity, refining capacities. So when it comes to Kyrgyzstan, except, like for Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, one of the main exporting commodities is clothing, the cotton and etc. And primarily, And although the export to Russia has declined, still Russia remains, especially after the joining Eurasian Union, Russia remains one of the major trade partners for Kyrgyzstan. And if we talk about imports, the main importing commodities are fuels, agri-food, food products, chemicals, and metals. Okay, Tajikistan is probably least dependent on Russian trade simply because of the geographic location, and but still, the country depends on primarily supply of oil products from Russia, and as I said, it's similarly with Kazakhstan and other republics, agricultural products declined in early 2000s due to the aggressive policy by Rospotrebnadzor. Okay, Turkmenistan. It's Turkmenistan. Actually, I have to make a remark. Also, there was Turkmenistan was one of the actual major trading partner of Turkmenistan in terms of export of natural gas was Ukraine. But once in 2000s, simply because Ukraine was receiving through pipeline Druzhba the majority of the gas from the country, and then after the conflict, the trade has declined significantly. But if we talk about trade with Russia, you know, it's still dependent on imports of wood, metals, and stone and glass, primarily due to the boom of construction boom in the region, and primarily exporting cotton products, cotton textile to Russia. So when we look at Uzbekistan, it's similarly, as you can see, there was due to the aggressive policy of Rospotrebnadzor, actually Uzbekistan turned into net importing in terms of agri-food products, and the main actual export from Uzbekistan to Russia was textile and cotton products, while importing significantly all kind of machines, metals, except for the early 2000s when they were exporting the cars to Russia. So this is the most important part, probably the most interesting part. There is actual data for Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, the new after the full-scale invasion, and as you can see, there is the increase in export from Kazakhstan to Russia by 62% year-to-year increase. So if we talk about the types of products that were exported, they were like machinery, transport, chemicals, all those goods that were were stopped supplying from European Union. So, and as you can see, the imports increased from European Union. So actually, it looks like the Kazakhstan was involved in parallel trade from European Union to Russia, while imports did not change significantly. As you can see, the seasonal, if you look at the monthly changes, it was a delayed effect simply because the export has started growing by summer, and then and kept rising by end of the till the end of the year. It's probably there was a delayed effect of the Western sanction. Okay, so it's customs union, unrestricted currency conversion. This is the major problem, as we know, for Kazakhstan. That's where the key enablers for parallel trade. If we talk about Kyrgyzstan actually the export from Kyrgyzstan to Russia overshoot in 2022, and primarily the same similar kind of direction was importing from the import from European Union grew by 62%, and it looks like it was obvious signs of parallel trade, parallel imports from Kyrgyzstan to Russia, from European Union to Kyrgyzstan and to Russia. And if we see, yeah, this is my few last ones. Uzbekistan is similarly, it's started growing its exports, and it similarly was a European Union that were the major source of export. So if we talk about of conclusion, it's the Russian dominance of the region, and there is parallel trade, and probably the region is known for underreporting the trade volumes, so it's likely they're underreporting in 22-23. And this is actually the last topic is my ongoing project research work I'm doing on the financial sovereignty of Central Asian republics, and it depends on Russian ruble exchange. And if we talk about what is sources, it's probably rather political decision. So this dependence on regional Soviet nomenclature, which is still in power, dependence on Moscow, and that's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Almaz. Now I want to give the floor to our next speaker, and that's Dr. Nicolás Zambrana-Tévar, and he is studied law at the Complutense University in Madrid. He did LLM in international business law at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He worked as a lawyer in the field of international litigation and arbitration at the Freshfields at the Gurigas. He was executive director of international programs at the University of Navarre in Pamplona, where he was also a lecturer and where he got his PhD in international investment law. So, Dr. Nicolás, the title of his chapter is Central Asia and the War in Ukraine with Legal Risks for Individuals and the Legal Entities. Please, Dr. Nicolás.
So, thank you so much, Professor Karabayeva, for inviting me to participate in this project. I am really thankful. And what I do in my chapter is to discuss legal risks, and what I have labeled legal risks arising from the impact that the war on Ukraine has had and may have in the future on Central Asia is twofold. On the one hand, I discuss the potential criminal and civil liability for war-related crimes and other wrongful actions, the liability that Central Asian individuals and Central Asian entities might have. And on the other hand, risks arising from sanctions and other restrictive measures imposed by Western countries on Russia. With respect to the risk of criminal and civil liability, what I do is mostly a prediction. And what I predict is that we might be at the beginning of decades-long litigation before criminal courts and civil courts in Europe, but also maybe in North America as well, against war criminals from Russia, against Russian entities. But increasingly, there is also the risk that entities and individuals considered accessories to war crimes are also brought before civil courts and criminal courts. In fact, it is much easier at the present stage to bring non-sovereign entities before domestic courts than sovereign entities. And the reason is obviously sovereign immunities and other doctrines such as the act of state doctrine. So many countries in Europe and North America have activated their universal jurisdiction statutes, and there are ongoing judicial investigations on war crimes in Ukraine. And in the coming years, this might lead to, as I say, criminal litigation and civil litigation. And victims of these war crimes in Ukraine may find that it is much easier to file a lawsuit against a corporation which is accused of being an accessory and contributing to the war effort, much easier than filing a claim against, say, Vladimir Putin or the Ministry of Defense of Russia. Even if there is a peace treaty between Russia and the United States, and even if Ukraine is part of that treaty at some point, we have good examples in recent history of how domestic courts have not considered that such peace treaties preclude the possibility that victims of war crimes bring claims on their own against the aggressor. We've got the example of claims before Korean courts against Japan and Japanese war criminals, even though Japan had, after the Second World War, had to pay compensation directly to Korea for the invasion of Korea prior to the Second World War and during the Second World War. Similarly, even though Germany had to pay large compensation to the countries it invaded during the Second World War, different domestic courts in Greece and Italy have considered that individuals who were victims or heirs of victims in Greece and Italy had legal standing to bring a lawsuit of their own, in this case, civil lawsuits against Germany for war crimes committed on Italian soil and on Greek soil. So I make the prediction that in the coming decades, because it will take decades to see the end of this series of lawsuits, in the coming decades we may see lawsuits brought by victims and relatives of victims of war crimes in Ukraine before the courts of probably London, because London is at the present time the center of the world in terms of human rights litigation. So there will be increasingly an increasing amount of litigation before London courts, probably also the courts of other European countries, maybe courts in New York, because under the Alien Tort Statute, there, for at least for a time, US courts were also very popular among human rights litigators. And we might also find that corporations and individuals who are accused of contributing to the Russian war effort are named either as principal defendants or as secondary defendants, if it is believed that they contributed to the war effort, maybe by selling weapons to Russia or by facilitating the invasion and the war in any way. On the other hand, I refer to what I call risks arising from sanctions and other restrictive measures imposed by Western countries. And what I do there is, first of all, to try to clarify some of the confusion that arises when we talk about sanctions, because when we talk about sanctions, we are talking about different things. So we were talking about primary sanctions on the one hand, secondary sanctions on the other hand. Primary sanctions and to a large extent sanctions as a whole are typically sanctions on the individuals and entities of the countries which impose the sanctions. So when we talk about sanctions on Russia and sanctions on Russian entities, to a large extent, what we are talking about are sanctions which are going to be enforced against individuals and entities of the United States, of the European Union, and the United Kingdom. Okay, and so sanctions are imposed on companies which are prohibited from importing products from Russia, and even when a sanction is imposed directly on a Russian individual or a Russian entity, the enforcement of that sanction also involves exercising some sort of jurisdiction over somebody who is in Europe or somebody who is in the United States or in the United Kingdom. For instance, travel bans. When you prohibit someone from Russia from to travel to the United States or to the European Union, to a large extent, what you are doing is to make an order that they cannot land in the country. So the sanction is really on those who permit that that person travels to the United States or travel to the United Kingdom. I also believe that the study of the very complex legal regime of sanctions in the European Union and North America and the United Kingdom also reflects very well the way that you have described the response of Central Asia towards Russia and towards the war in Ukraine, and that is resilience and equidistant diplomacy. I think that those words describe very well the attitude that Central Asian countries have had towards the sanctions regime. On the one hand, Central Asian countries have openly declared that they would not include sanctions into their domestic legislation. But on the other hand, they have vowed to comply with the sanctions regime in the sense that they would not permit Central Asian countries to be used as a conduit or as a mechanism to avoid these sanctions. And I think that Central Asian countries, to a large extent, have been pretty successful in doing both things, in not applying sanctions as such, but also in complying with the sanctions to the point that Western authorities are pretty satisfied with the way that Central Asian countries have behaved. So, for instance, Kazakhstani financial authorities and central banks have imposed or have directed pretty clear guidelines on banks of their respective jurisdictions, and these guidelines have, for instance, led Kazakhstani banks and other Central Asian banks to end key corresponding banking relationships with Russian counterparties. Okay, so in a way that has been instrumental in cutting Russia away from the SWIFT system. However, it has proved to be much easier to indirectly impose these type of financial sanctions, which involve central banks in Central Asian countries giving orders to their own banks. That has been pretty easy. What has been much more difficult is to avoid that Central Asian countries participate or indirectly participate in the type of commercial activities that have been the subject of other type of commercial sanctions restricting trade with Russia. For the kind of evading tactics that Central Asian countries have not been able to avoid involve, for instance, the use of third-party intermediaries, which are sometimes falsely named as end users, use of transshipment points, disguising the involvement of specially designated nationals and bloc persons, falsifying transactional documents, etc. I think that we still have to monitor how Central Asian countries comply with sanctions, because even if the abolishing of American sanctions will probably be part of any deal done between Russia and the United States, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has already vowed to maintain the 16 different packages of sanctions that have been imposed so far, and it will be very likely that they continue to impose those sanctions now that they have been completely sidelined from the negotiations. So maybe as a way of showing how disappointed they are, they will continue with the sanction regime. So Central Asian countries will continue to navigate this very complex sanction regime. Thank you very much.
List author, Dr. Rustam Zajanov, and he is one of the leading international law scholars in international, let's say, framework in Central Asian region also. And the Professor Zajanov serves as a member of the editorial boards in a number of academic journals in Europe and Asia, including the Journal of International Peacekeeping and the Journal of Humanity, Peace and Justice. He is a member of several academic and professional entities at both international and national levels, as the Asian, European, American Societies of International Law and the Uzbek Association of International Law. Since 2021, he has been a member of the World Commission on Environmental Law within the IUCN system. The floor is yours. Rustam Zajanov, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, dear Assylzat. It's a big pleasure for me to speak at such an important event, at such a book launch, the idea for which came out quite, in a speedy way the last 2 weeks. I think it was very lucky. I'm very happy to see that there are so many people here, including some of my students as well, with whom we just recently discussed some of these issues affecting the entire region, and it's very, very relevant today. Unlike some of my colleagues, I should say from the very beginning that my chapter here, titled International Legal Implications of the Russian-Ukrainian War for Central Asian States, does not attempt to predict or to make any predictions about how the scenarios are going to develop. And considering that my colleagues already dealt with some of the possible litigation aspects, individual criminal responsibility aspects, possibilities for the courts to prosecute those individuals or non-state actors who would be found or should be found responsible for international crimes committed in the during the war. I'm not going to focus on that. I'm focusing in my chapter on international legal obligations of the 5 Central Asian states in terms of human rights, what rights, fundamental rights and freedoms they are supposed to respect when it comes to the consequences of this terrible armed conflict. And also, I should make it very clear from the very beginning that I do not belong to the camp of those who try to find optimistic or positive, sifting out positive elements from the consequences of this war for this region. I rather prefer to call myself more realistic, belonging to the camp of realists, who would also see that observing the tenets of law, observing the fundamental requirements of international law, is key at this moment, more than ever before, and Central Asian states are not exception to that. This is very, very important. What key international legal concerns for Central Asia on this particular matter are being discussed in this particular chapter? First of all, the very first conclusion would be that, okay, let me try it. Okay, it's working, thanks. So the 5 Central Asian states in question are directly and also indirectly negatively impacted by the war because of the historical and cultural ties, because of the geographical proximity, because of all those connections, including the language, right, common history, and so on and so forth, to Russia and Ukraine, both of them, okay, to the north and to the west. So, of course, they are affected. People have been living under the population in this big region. They have been living under the constant stress, I'd say. I myself personally have many friends in Ukraine, for example, and dear colleagues there who are suffering because of this war. It affects every day our everyday activities, right? So this is from moral and mental and ethical point of view, this is a very difficult time, I should say. And this has been happening since 2014. That's when the war started, not in 2022. In 2022, in February, the war moved into active phase, with invasion phase. So this is what international law says. And of course, the impact is tremendous, and we have been observing that every day. And unfortunately, we still cannot say or predict for sure what's going to happen next. As my colleague, Dr. Ibadildin, already said, that this book is already becoming, in a way, historical, because there have been very fast developments over the recent weeks, and we don't know what's going to happen in March, for example, in terms of how the United States changed its perspective, its official position, its official stance, right? So it's becoming very volatile and unpredictable, even compared to as things have been developing for the last 3 years, right? So legal obligations that I mentioned before under international law for all Central Asian states, they first of all include respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity in accordance with the United Nations Charter, Article 2, Paragraph 4. And as we all know, all the post-Soviet states, they are members of they're state parties to the United Nations Charter, and accordingly members of the United Nations Organization. So nowadays, it becomes clear more than ever that this key principle of international law must be observed. And those instances which were mentioned by my colleague before, when Kazakhstan, for example, Kazakhstan's head of state officially stated that Kazakhstan would not recognize the legitimacy of annexation of Crimea or the separatist regions, Donetsk and Luhansk regions, as separate entities. These instances are very clearly showing us that at least some of the states in the region are more vocal than others in terms of how exactly they view their relevant international legal obligations and how they're going to act in accordance with those obligations. This has been encouraging. When I read about it for the first time, it was kind of, for me, a very positive note, very hopeful note. However, it should not be too hopeful, because unfortunately, we also observe that despite these important official public statements, when we look at the actions of the state actors in this region, in particular Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, when it comes to the UN level, they also cause questions. There have been several resolutions since February 2022, resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly, for example, calling the Russian Federation an aggressor state. And we observed at the time that countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, they refrained from voting for those resolutions. So we kind of have a certain discrepancy here. On the one hand, we have some strong statements and support from the population towards Ukraine in Kazakhstan more than in other states. On the other hand, we see that when it comes to the actions at the UN level, there is not so much, positive signals coming that way. So we are seeing certain discrepancies here. And maybe jumping forward, I should say that it's probably showing to us some elements of that type of diplomacy, which our colleagues already mentioned before. Very cautious survival approach, I would say, right? So on the one hand, Central Asian states are trying to maintain strategic silence. They are trying to balance their geopolitical interests while avoiding direct confrontation with Russia. Okay, it's a feeling of fear, I would say, right? And apart from human rights obligations that I'm going to cover very soon, there is one important, very important conclusion for me. Despite certain hopes and expectations that this crisis happening in the post-Soviet space could trigger certain, integration slash alliance slash uniting initiatives for the 5 Central Asian states, we're not observing it happening. They did not consolidate together in order to, resist the rhetoric and actions from the North. They did not come together to form a certain alliance, for example, peace or military alliance or other forms of unions. That didn't happen. States are still acting on the individual level here. Okay, they're preferring still and choosing for and opting for bilateral dialogue rather than, combined multilateral, very active and principled stances. And it's not new. I guess all of us know the famous saying, "Vostok delo tonko," right? East is a delicate matter. I hate saying that, but this is coming back again and again. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think it's a very good question. Yes, and these signs are worrying to me as well because I don't know if it's related to distrust towards one another or is it a mentality thing. So this is, I did not analyze that in the chapter all too deep. That wasn't my main purpose, but I feel important to say it here. Okay. Now, when it comes to international legal obligations proper, to fundamental human rights and obligations that the states in the region are obliged to follow. Okay, yeah. I don't think it's news to anybody that Central Asian states are legally bound by IHRL obligations because all of these states in the region, they joined the major human rights treaties, in particular the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, ensuring protection of civilians. And as we all might know, human rights law is applicable both during peacetime and during war. So our states are all bound by that. And when I say key human rights obligations, I mean the right to life, the right to be free from torture. These are absolute rights, fair trial rights, non-discrimination, and so on. So when it comes to protection of individuals trying to escape from the war, for example, Ukrainians, who have been coming to this region, but not in big quantities compared to Russian citizens fleeing from mobilization. The obligation of the states towards these individuals is that they have to ensure protection towards these individuals, right? So Dr. Ibadildin already mentioned certain scholarships. I believe there were 5 scholarships during the second half of 2022 for Ukrainian students from Ukraine. I don't think KIMEP was the only university. I think at least a couple more universities in Kazakhstan also did that. I have no information about Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan. We can check later. Yeah, it's also a positive sign. I had a very good student myself, Katya, also from Ukraine, very good student. And this is an example of that scholarships aid, right? There has been humanitarian aid to Ukrainians at the individual level. Individual citizens from Kazakhstan, they've been helping their friends, their colleagues, their peers in Ukraine who suffered because of the war. But again, the gap between official statements and certain actions and realization of the need for respecting international legal obligations and the voting behavior and other things, for example, continued economic cooperation with Russia, it highlights political caution that Central Asian states are trying to follow when they deal with actors like the Russian Federation and Ukraine, right? So this is okay. There is one more thing that I have to say. Maybe I didn't use the proper word in the slides, triggered skepticism, but I noticed that this armed conflict has triggered an increased skepticism toward international law within post-Soviet states, not just in Central Asia, but within post-Soviet states. And many people question the effectiveness of international law in terms of preventing aggression. But to be honest with you, I do not find it a very new criticism for international law. It has been undergoing this criticism for centuries now. Hey, this Westphalian system is not so effective. Okay, it never works. People tend to forget that international law works all the time, even as we speak, as we don't notice it, but it's working. All those thousands of treaties are working and allowing us to have our civilized lives. But every time when there is a violation of at least one rule of international law, people tend to start crying out, and journalists and media try to portray it as a huge catastrophe and crisis because it's sexy news, right? And then people start to think, and even some students, they ask me questions like, international law, is it really a law? So we engage in a very interesting dialogue from there. International law, of course, it works, but the level of efficiency, it may vary depending on the particular factors related to the state sovereignty and actual situation on the ground. So this is so this skepticism among general population and also even some lawyers, it increased after February 2022 invasion. It's definitely a negative development, but I would like to encourage everybody not to really get caught up with the hype, right? Because international relations is about international law. International law is about regulating international relations. And I think this this interdependency between these very two important fields, it should not be forgotten, right? So without international law, there would not have been independent states in the post-Soviet space. As simple as that. Yes, and my last slide would be, okay, yeah, thank you. So, key legal considerations for Central Asia, for Central Asian 5 states would be for the near future to continue maintaining neutrality versus upholding international law. As an international legal scholar, I would always opt for the second option, but reality is reality. So we will continue, as I think, seeing this very cautious approach in the behavior of Central Asian states. There will be, if some of this or one of these states explicitly oppose Russia, there will be potential economic and diplomatic repercussions. Unfortunately, the aggressive and negative rhetoric from the Russian state representatives, this is not an illusion. This can actually happen. So we all have to be wary of that, I think. Despite the critical approach towards the United Nations and the OSCE, I think the Central Asian states need to more and better engage with them in order to try to uphold regional stability. So my couple of recommendations that I'm making in my chapter would be to strengthen adherence to international legal norms for all Central Asian states, to support diplomatic solutions. Diplomacy is not dead, okay? Yeah, and peaceful conflict resolution mechanisms more than ever. And of course, always engage in regional cooperation to mitigate certain spillover effects that will continue to be having. So that's basically it, what I wrote in my chapter. You're all welcome to comment on it, ask questions, and I'll try my best to answer them once we have the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, our amazing authors. So now let's turn to our Q&A session because we are running a little behind than the scheduled time. So maybe we're going to have short questions and short answers from the author side. Yeah, short questions and short answers. So let's collect the questions. Please introduce yourself shortly.